Hey friends, it's Unicorn and it is time for my February wrap-up. In January, I gave every book I read a 5-star and February continued to be a strong reading month for me. And on top of that, I started to read a genre that I don't usually read, which is science fiction, and I absolutely enjoyed it. I stopped reading science fiction about 10 years ago after I read Three Body Problems because I hated that book with a passion, but it's a Story of Another Day. However, that book did put me off of reading science fiction altogether, so I'm overjoyed that I started to pick it up again. I read 7 books in total in February. 4 of them are science fiction, 2 of them are historical fiction, and I also read 1 nonfiction. And also, I DNF'd the book means that I did not finish that, but it's not because the book was bad, it's just a bad timing, which I'll explain later. So without further ado, let's dive into the books. The first book I read in February is The Mercies by Kiran Millwood Hargrave. I picked up this book because of 2 things. A, it's a historical fiction. B, it's set in Norway. The combination of the 2 buzzwords can make me pick up everything because I love historical fiction and I'm obsessed with Norway. So this book is literally just like calling my name. The story was set in 1600 in Norway, where a fishing village has a fishing accident which killed off almost all the men in the village. So all there left were women and younger men. So the women who usually take care of domestic business needed to learn how to fish and provide for themselves. But traditionally, those jobs are indecent for women to do. And a few years later, after the peacefulness has been established again, a sinister man and his wife came to this village. We follow 2 narrations. The first one is one woman in this village who is living through the aftermath of the accident, and the second narration is actually the wife of the sinister man who have never seen a independent woman in her entire life before she came to this village. This is such a gruesome story with strong female characters. After all the men got wiped out, the women needed to adapt to a new way to live, and of course different people have different ways to digest the new information and also adapt it to the changes, which lead to very interesting political dynamic and outcome. Pacing-wise, the first half of the book is a little bit slower than the second half. However, consider this book is only about 350 pages or so, so I wouldn't say it's a slow burn. It's almost like a medium burn, if you will. And after everything built up, the book burst into intense activities. Actually, only by then you'll notice that you've already invested in a lot of emotions to the story and to the characters. At least it is for me. So I got quite nervous when everything is wrapping up. The story was actually based on a real historical event, which I didn't know until after I had finished the book, but that fact actually made me feel more chilling about the whole story. And on top of that, I like this book in a more personal level because a lot of the places that this book mentioned I have visited. So I got quite excited whenever a place that I've been to was brought up in this book. Overall, I really enjoyed this book and I would recommend this book to anyone who enjoy a historical fiction. And then I started my journey of reading science fiction, more specifically dystopian science fiction. And the first book I read is I Who Have Never Known Men by Belgian writer Jacqueline Harpman and translated from French by Ron Schwartz. This is a very unique and short story which is also quite hard to describe, and it also has some violent scenes, so content warnings for physical violence. The story was told from a young woman's perspective. She, along with other 39 women, were imprisoned in this cage that is buried deep underground, and they were guarded by male guards 24/7, or we didn't even know if they were guarded 24/7, but that's how she felt. And different from her other 39 cellmates, she was the only one who was captured well before she formed a memory, so she has no memory about outside world, and she didn't even know how an ordinary life would be like. And her other 39 cellmates, they somehow has the memories before they got captured because they were all quite older than her, but their memories are blurry as well. And that's pretty much the only thing I want to say about the story, and I recommend you to read this book not knowing more and really experience the desperate and bleak atmosphere with the narrator. This book is imaginative and poignant, and also it has so many philosophical discussions packed in this short story. And when I was reading it, I really started to question the meaning of at least freedom and life and death. And are we really free as humans? And what's the meaning of humanity? What makes us human? Otherwise, there were actually a small thing in the beginning of the story that I didn't like, but luckily it didn't last for long and it didn't affect my overall enjoyment of this book. Next, I read a modern classic, dystopian science fiction, and is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. And my edition is the 60th anniversary edition with an introduction by Neil Gaiman, which I totally didn't notice until I picked up this book for this video. In this book, the protagonist Montag is a fireman, but the reality he lives in is far from ours. In his world, in order to keep people happy, the government has banned books and all sorts of publishing materials to prevent the developing of any upsetting thoughts or revolutionary ideas. Everybody is living in fireproof houses, so there's no danger of the house catching fire. So Montag's job is actually to go around and burn books all around the country. So Montag goes to work, burns books, and goes back to home to live with his wife, who seems to have a difficulty to remember the details of their lives. But Montag has never questioned this routine until he met a curious and energetic neighbor of his who brought up his curiosity to the past. This is a book that I think every book lover should read, and I guarantee that you will love it. It's a book about books, although the books are illegal in this world and doesn't really exist. And by the absence of the books, this book, how many times can I repeat books in this review? Anyhow, so this book explores the meaning of writing, reading, and remembering throughout the discussions and the conversations that the characters in this book has. And I found it's very interesting how a book was first published in 1953 actually reflecting on our real world, raising the same question that we have today with different causes. For example, one issue this book was addressing is the shortened attention span of people, which rings so true in our current society. However, in this book, the shortened attention span was caused by TV shows, and in our current world, it's the social media, of course. But that actually makes me think maybe the problem is always there, just we kind of blame the mediums instead of just really looking for a solution within the society and our structure. The story is actually shorter than I expected. In fact, in this edition, half of the books are the notes and reviews, and of course the introduction by Neil Gaiman, which I completely skipped. So it ends abruptly for me, and I was quite unsatisfied at that point, but after a while, I started to feel like the ending of this book is kind of brilliant. Following another dystopian science fiction, I read Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler, and this book unfortunately became my first and a very big disappointment of 2023. It's partially my fault because I was looking forward to read Octavia E. Butler's books for so long because I have heard nothing but amazing things about her writing. Unfortunately, it didn't work out and I didn't really enjoy this book as much as I thought. However, the setting of this book is very interesting because the book was published in 1995 and it sets in the future from 1995 in Southern California, which actually the year is 2024. So reading it in 2023, knowing it's only 1 year until 2024, and a lot of the things in the story rings true in our current time, kind of gave me a very scary feeling. So in this book, and also in our current time, California has already started to suffering from the consequences of climate change. And different from the reality, in this book, the California is much more violent, chaos happened everywhere, and people kind of losing faith in life. The protagonist of this book is called Lauren, and she suffers from hyper-empathy, which means that she can feel other people's pain at the same time when others are suffering. Despite her age, Lauren has a really strong mind, and she's not afraid to stand up for herself and protect herself and the others around her. And like I said, I love the world building and I'm terrified to see how close this book is to our real life because I also live in California and this year we have some severe weathers. Like we have so much rains in the winter which might make you think it's good for the drought, but it's actually a very unfortunate thing because we don't have the capability to store so much water. And the river supply that we're living from, the Colorado River, is continue to suffering from the drought. And I can go on and on about that for like another 3 hours, so I'll stop here. Anyhow, back to the book. The thing that I suffer from the most from this book is the pacing. The pacing is just so slow. I understand it might be a character-driven story, and I understand it's also the first book of a trilogy, which maybe everything is building up. So at first I try to find excuses for this book, but then I realized a lot of the series that I loved has a really strong first book as well. So you don't necessarily need to be a slow-pacing book to build up a world in the trilogy or a series. So eventually I have to face the fact that the pacing is just not for me. On top of that, I also don't vibe with the theme of this book. This book is heavily religion inspired, I would say. It's not necessarily any religion that is in our real life, but a religion that was slowly creating in this world, which I just don't get the idea. I'm not a religious person, so it's very hard for me to rationalize why people in severe conditions need to find something to worship or find something to believe in. Why can't you just believe in, kindness and world peace? I don't know. So I guess what I wanted to say is I don't really care about the plot enough, which unfortunately also limited my investment to the story. So needless to say, I was disappointed, especially when I thought I would love this book. But I'm also grateful for this book to make me realize that I'm a plot-driven reader, not a character-driven reader. Actually, before this book, I haven't really thought about this question that much. I hear people say the difference between them every so often, but now I really realize that I'm a plot-driven reader. I just cannot do with a only pure character-driven book. And also Shannon from That's of Poe also pointed out in my vlog where I was reading this book that the fact that I like mystery novels may be also because I'm a plot-driven reader, because mysteries also are heavily plot-driven. So thank you, Shannon. And as for Octavia E. Butler, I will at least read another 2 of her books because first of all, I own them. One of them is the sequel to the story and the other one is Kindred. I feel like I should at least give her some other chances because she deserves it. And I hope I will like the sequel more when the pacing of the story picked up. Moving on to a science fiction that saved my day, I read Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. I'm very late on both of this book, I know, but I'm really glad that I finally read it, and I think this is a good timing of reading it. The story was set when the civilization kind of collapsed because of an epidemic. We are following 2 timelines. The first one was our current time and our current world. We followed the life story of a Hollywood star called Arthur who died on stage one snowy night, and his death shook everyone around him, including all his ex-wives and his friends. But little did they know, this shocking event is actually the last ordinary thing that happened in their lives. And the second timeline, fast forward to 15 years later, when the world has already collapsed and people are trying to find order in this unstructured life. I had so much emotions reading this book. I know that we all experienced not even an epidemic but a pandemic in the past few years, and we are actually still living in it. So we all have very complicated feelings about it. And when I was reading this book, my memory actually jumped to 3 years before, because when the news of the pandemic broke out, I'm actually at the airport. And in this book, everything started in the airport as well. I vividly remember that I was one of the first few people who started to wear masks in the airport, and I even told the Homeland Security guy that he should probably start to wear a mask. There are so many mixed feelings, memories, and emotions stirred in me when I was reading this book, and sometimes I feel like it hits too close to home, but I'm also glad that I didn't read it at the moment when pandemic started to break out. So yeah, I think after 3 years, it's a good timing for me to read it. But reality aside, this book is just wonderful. There's so many dual timeline books out there, but this one I feel like it's very special because it's brilliantly designed, and I just love how the 2 worlds slowly merge into each other. In the world that we know, you have this seemingly ordinary life of the Hollywood star Arthur, and nothing seems quite odd, but something is just, strange. And in the timeline where everything collapsed, you have different hidden traces of the previous world, but apparently everything is just so different. And I loved how they contrast each other, how they tangle together, just how they coexist in the story. So overall, a very enjoyable read. I loved it so much. Second to the last, I finished a nonfiction, and it is entitled How Male Privilege Hurts Women by Kate Manne. I discovered this book when I was doing the top 10 books in the Chinese reading community video for 2022. I got very curious about it, and also it's apparently translated into Chinese and was well received. This is a book where the subtitle explains it all. It's a book about how the male privilege makes men think they are entitled with a lot of things, including sex, consent, Medicare, body control, and of course domestic labor, and a lot more. Personally, I feel like this book is really helpful in terms of it helped me to clear some questions and confusions that I had. For example, it discussed the difference between misogyny and sexism, and also it talks a little bit about the history of incel, which I didn't know how the movement or the concept came from. However, a lot of the books or events that this book refers to, I have already read or knew, so it's definitely not a groundbreaking book on feminism per se, but it's definitely a book that will fill into the gaps that you may have or piece everything together in a more structured way. So on that terms, I feel it's very beneficial. Initially, I borrowed this book from the library, but I really want to have my own copy to have a reference, so I also got this copy of myself. And the last book I read in February was the wonderful book The Secrets of the Hartwood Hall by Katie Lumsden. And in full disclosure, I'm a long-time subscriber to Katie's booktube channel Books and Things, and I try to participate in Victober every year when Katie hosts in October, which is an event she encouraged us to read more Victorian literature. Although I never succeed, I do try to participate every October. So I know Kitty's love for Victorian literature so well, so of course her debut novel, which set in Victorian era, automatically became one of my most anticipated new release of the year. And I was kindly sent this copy from Dutton Books, which is a imprint from Penguin Random House, and I was so excited that I got to read it. The story was set in 1852. A newly widowed woman called Margaret found a job as a governor in a mansion called Hartwood Hall to teach their 10-year-old boy called Louis. But upon arrival, Margaret found out there's something peculiar with this house. For example, it's quite spooky, it's short staffs, it's very isolated as the owner, Mrs. Eversam, doesn't really communicate with the people in the nearby village, which actually stirred some gossip around this family. So naturally, Margaret became very curious, but she also wanted to be a responsible governor, so we follow her story when she was trying to make a life in this big house. I was actually very impressed by the readability of this book. It's smooth to read and very captivating. It's a lot different from how I imagine a historical fiction set in Victorian era could be, and I also don't doubt the second of the historical fact in this book because Katie is quite an expert on this topic. When I was reading it, I didn't want to stop because every character has their own little hidden secrets which I want to discover layer after layers. However, as suspense story and mysteries sometimes makes me feel, sometimes I feel like the plot happened too easy to the characters to push everything forward, especially all the things in this book happened within a few weeks of Margaret's arrival. But it's also for that reason I feel like this book is very modernly written. It's definitely not only for historical or mystery readers. I also really like the message that it's delivering, especially it's reflecting on women's livelihood in Victorian era and building some strong female characters. And that's all the books that I finished reading in February, but before we go, I want to report back on the book that I did not finish, and that is Consent, a memoir by Vanessa Springora and translated from French by Natasha Lehrer. Firstly, I want to say I didn't finish this book. It's not because I think it's not worth reading. On the contrary, I feel like it's a very important book and it will deserve a good read. However, I did not finish it because it was just too heavy for me at that time. This is a memoir of the writer about her relationship and also sexual exploitation from the French writer Gabriel Matzneff when she was 13, I would say, and he was 50. By the topic, you can see it's a heavy book for sure, but I didn't even go that far because it just hurts so much to read. Vanessa Springora was so mistreated by everyone, including her parents, even when she was a baby. And the things happened to her from both of her parents, I would argue, is so unimaginable, and it just hurts so much and it's just so painful to continue. Usually I can take on some heavy stuff and I can read books, especially by survivors, because I feel like they're just so important for them to have a voice, and it's very important for us to read as many as possible. But this time I just can't. Maybe this book is just heavier than usual, or maybe it's just not a good timing for me to read it, but I do hope in the future I will have the strength to pick it up again and finish reading it. And that's all the books that I read and also DNF'd in February. Please let me know any of your thoughts about those books. Have you read them? Have you heard about them? And what did you read in February? Leave a comment in the comment section down below, and thumbs up to this video if you liked it. I wish you happy reading, stay healthy, stay safe. I'll see you in my next bookish video. Bye!